Last week, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments for a case that has the potential to dramatically impact abortion in America. Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health is the first opportunity in 30 years to overturn Roe v. Wade. So what is the Dobbs case all about? What are the potential outcomes? How can it impact Roe versus Wade? What will the justices likely rule? What is the church's role in abortion dialogue? And what does America look like in a post-Roe era? Thank you for joining us today, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Wesley Reed with the Standing for Freedom Center. Today I have the privilege of being joined by policy experts who will provide their insight on these questions. All right, so thanks so much for joining. All right, let's start here. We'll start with TESSA, and then we'll just come my way. TESSA LONGBONS, Senior Research Fellow with the Charlotte Lozier Institute. Charlotte Lozier? Lozier.
Charlotte Lozier Institute.
I try to sound fancy, Lozier, but it's okay. All right, so give me your background and what you do with CLI.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me, John. Yes, like you said, I'm a Senior Research Associate with the Charlotte Lozier Institute, and Charlotte Lozier Institute is the research and education arm of Susan B. Anthony List. And so we do science and statistics for life. We want to bring the latest science and research to bear on the life issue. And my role in that is helping with our data analytics department and tracking state-level abortion statistics, focusing heavily on chemical abortion and just trying to keep an eye on what's going on in the country. And so, of course, really excited to see Dobbs and the potential that has to change abortion in America.
Awesome. SBA List and all their subcomponents are doing really, really great work. Joseph Backholm from Family Research Council, you're the Senior Fellow for Biblical Worldview. Is that?
That's correct.
All right, cool.
Yes.
So your background and what you do at FRC.
Well, I am the Senior Fellow for Biblical Worldview, which means I get to focus on the intersection between ideas and public policy and really try to provide for the church an understanding of the fact that our political disagreements aren't fundamentally political, and their worldview assumptions and the way we think about the nature of reality influences what we think about everything, what is and what ought to be, and in my judgment explains primarily the political quarrels that we have. It's not people who have good intentions or bad intentions or smart people versus dumb people. It's just people who have different worldviews. And I think it's important to understand that as we engage in these issues. So I get to help do that. And I came from the political space. I ran a public policy group in Washington State for 10 years. And so I've been around this for a while, and I love doing it.
Awesome. And Denise Harle from Alliance Defending Freedom, you're Director of the Center for Life.
Okay. Yes, so I'm Senior Counsel at Alliance Defending Freedom, which is my dream job. Alliance Defending Freedom is an organization that exists to keep doors open for the gospel. We do that through legal advocacy, defending fundamental freedoms. Our life team, our Center for Life, focuses on pro-life legislation and just protecting life from the moment of conception until natural death. And so that is the joy that I get to work on day in, day out, is legislation and litigation, promoting and defending the unborn. And yesterday was obviously a very exciting day for us.
Yeah. I feel like I work with ADF just because I've been covering Tanner Cross, it was in Loudoun County, Barronville Stutzman. I've been doing a lot of just kind of following you guys for the last few weeks, but they still refuse to pay me, so I don't know what's happening with that. So as we've mentioned so far, folks, this is centered on the Dobbs case, and I'm going to provide a quick summary of what Dobbs is, the history of it, and the potential ramifications from it. So the Dobbs case centers on a 15-week abortion ban out of Mississippi. Essentially what this looks like is 15 weeks gestation, no abortions with minor exceptions. Now, this has been challenged in the district court. In fact, the day it was signed into law in March of 2018, the day that it was signed into law, the Center for Reproductive Rights filed suit in district court, and the next day they were awarded a temporary restraining order. That's how fast these people are at combating these pro-life initiatives. Over the next year and a half, Mississippi would see the district and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling against them on the precedent of Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey. Now, some of the opinions that the justices or the judges gave did not seem to have necessarily a personal position associated with them, but they simply said, we are the lower federal court and it's our job to rule in sync with precedent, and that's exactly what they did. So in 2020, Mississippi requested the Supreme Court hear their case, and then in mid-2021, the Supreme Court granted certs, and they granted cert to address the particular question on do all pre-viability prohibitions on elective abortions, are they unconstitutional? The reason that question is so imperative to this entire dialogue is because the Roe and Casey precedents are based on just that, particularly Casey, that says no states, or essentially no states can ban abortions pre-viability. You can have regulatory power with abortion procedures, but not on the abortions themselves. So NIFLA versus Becerra, June Medical, Hellerstedt, there have been many abortion-related cases that have happened since Casey, but none of them, at the Supreme Court at least, stick to, really hit the crux, hit the issue of viability until last week. So oral arguments were heard, and the oral arguments seem in our favor, and that is where we are at with Dobbs. Okay, there's a few potential outcomes here. One is that the Supreme Court overturns or affirms the lower court ruling, which would just strike down the Mississippi ban completely. A middle ground option is that they uphold the Mississippi ban while also upholding Casey or Roe. And then the third option, which is the option that we're hoping for, is that they uphold the Mississippi ban and they overturn Roe. Now, Roe and Casey, I don't need to get into all the details of there. When we say Roe, technically Casey is the law of the land, but Roe is the more historic one, so we just say Roe for sake of communication. The lawyer might disagree with me.
Nodding.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's just the history of this case, and the history has yet to be completed. We will probably know at the latest June what the decision is. So, Tessa, I'm going to go to you for the first question. The fact that Dobbs is even a question, the fact that Dobbs is even a conversation, the fact that Roe has been challenged so aggressively that it's made its way back to the Supreme Court, how is that implicative of the opinions that Americans have about abortion?
Well, I think it just goes to show that the American people don't see this as a settled issue. We know that a majority of Americans support limits on abortion. We know that 2021 has been a record year for pro-life laws in the states. And so I think this shows that the American people want the ability to discuss and debate these issues for themselves and have their elected officials be the ones who are making these decisions, not the Supreme Court. Roe is very extreme. When you compare the U.S. to the international community, we're one of only a handful of countries that permit elective abortion after 20 weeks. That short list includes China and North Korea. When you compare us with Europe, 47 out of 50 European countries limit elective abortion before 15 weeks, which is when Mississippi would like to limit it. And so I think the American people don't like how extreme our abortion law is under Roe. And we've learned so much in the 50 years since Roe, the 30 years since Casey, about the unborn, about development in the womb. In fact, one of the recent projects of the Charlotte Lozier Institute was the Voyage for Life, which is this week by week a picture of the development of unborn babies. And so many people have ultrasound pictures hanging on their fridges. And I think we've just gained a much better understanding of what we're talking about when we talk about abortion. So yeah. I think all of this unsettled and ripe for it to go back to the people to make these decisions for themselves.
Back to the people, and we'll actually talk in a few minutes about what that means. If Roe is overturned, the application of sending it back to the states is going to have a tremendous influence, and again, we'll address that here in a bit. So the oral arguments yesterday, there are several people who are listening in. But one of the silver linings to COVID is that the Supreme Court said we're not going to let people in the court anymore to listen, at least during COVID season, but we are going to broadcast it live. So that's been fun for a lot of cases, not for some others. But overall, we're looking really positive. Roger Severino, I'm going to quote him. He says that the pro-life movement should rejoice with how the SCOTUS oral arguments went. I count 6 votes upholding the Mississippi law and 5 to 6 directly overturning Roe. Only Sotomayor defended the more extreme arguments of the pro-abortion side, and poorly. No surprise there. Mike Ferris, president of Alliance Defending Freedom, says the oral argument in the Dobbs case is winding up. He said this while they were still arguing. I am ecstatic. It could not have gone better. There's no guarantee of the outcome. I don't have the gift of prophecy. That's him saying it, not me. But it sounded very, very encouraging. The court will make an initial decision this week and assign the case to a justice to draft the majority decision. But this initial vote can be revisited at any point. We need to stay in prayer until the decision is released. We need to always pray, but specifically that the requests will change. So those are two fairly credible sources, I would say, Roger Severino and Mike Ferris. Those oral arguments, if you haven't had a chance to listen, folks, you can find them on the Supreme Court website. Fascinating. If you have 2 hours of free time, you should do it. It's fun. So Denise, I'm going to go to you. Your thoughts on the oral arguments holistically, and then we'll get into some details.
Yeah, well, you go to my boss, and I would never disagree with my boss. I do want to mention his usual punchline when he says he doesn't have the gift of prophecy is he says, we're a nonprofit organization. So I got to give him credit for his usual joke.
Sure.
Overall, I would say I was very encouraged by the questions I heard from the justices. I didn't hear anything that really set off any alarm bells from the more conservative justices, and I frankly didn't hear anything particularly threatening from the three more liberal justices either. Justice Kagan in particular was quite silent for most of the argument, and she is, in my view, the most formidable in terms of being extremely bright, extremely strategic, and so I think that leaves some questions and certainly invites continued prayer. Just to give a couple specific examples of things I thought were encouraging, Justice Kavanaugh multiple times emphasized that if the Constitution is silent, if the Constitution is neutral on abortion, why wouldn't we just give it back to the states and get the courts out of the abortion policy business? So he seems to not only understand the problems that Roe and Casey have caused in so many ways in our nation, setting aside the 63 million lives lost, but just the political division and the deadlock and the inability for Americans to protect life. But he also, his comments were premised on the fact that the Constitution really doesn't say anything about abortion one way or the other, and certainly doesn't guarantee a right to it. So I thought that was encouraging. And Chief Justice Roberts also, from the very beginning, seemed to be looking for a way to throw out the viability standard, in my view. So his very first question was, wasn't that dicta? Was that really part of the decision? And so it did sound like maybe he was looking to see whether there was a middle ground. But regardless, he sure didn't seem interested in viability. He brought up the North Korea and China analogy and basically was asking, what's the difference between 21 or 22 weeks when viability is and 15 weeks? And the other side could not offer any principled justification for viability. And the other side flatly said, there is no middle ground. They doubled down. They said, you must keep Roe. There's no alternative. And so I think that tees it up really nicely for a clean overturning of Roe. And that's what we're obviously hoping for.
Joseph, thoughts?
I think the sentiment that people are encouraged is right. I think if a sports analogy is appropriate, and that's kind of where I always kind of go. I think the whole game was played on your side of the field. I think we were on offense, they were on defense in terms of having to basically make this argument that, well, a lot of the conversation was, how bad does a law have to be in order to, do away with stare decisis, right? Because generally we like to defer to prior court precedent, but is this bad enough? That was a lot of the conversation. And when that's the conversation guiding the debate, you got to feel good about it, because there wasn't anybody there saying, oh no, we think Casey's awesome. This has worked so well. Why would we change anything? I didn't see anybody making that argument. I thought it was interesting that, one of the Sotomayor went back to, well, there's a lot of stuff that's not in the Constitution that we've done. She went to Lawrence v. Texas. She went to Obergefell to basically say, if we stop legislating from the bench, what's that going to mean for all of our other radical social policies that we've done from the bench? And I thought that was telling about, where they are coming from. But fortunately, we think Sotomayor is in the minority right now.
Yeah, I would imagine she is. I don't typically carry out too much hope with her on these issues, but we pray for her anyways. So Mississippi Solicitor General Scott Stewart came out, and his introductory line was very powerful. He said, Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey still haunt America. They haunt our country. They have no basis in the Constitution. Denise, can you tell us what is that? I've heard other people say that. I am not the scholar here. That's why I have people like you on. What does that mean that Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey have no basis in the Constitution?
That means that plainly they were just a legal error. It was a constitutional error by the court. And again, we actually didn't really hear anyone say otherwise yesterday. So in Roe versus Wade, the 7 justices that were in the majority there admitted they were sort of discovering or creating a new constitutional right that no one had realized was in there. And they actually said, we are not sure totally where it comes from. They said it might be in the 14th Amendment's due process, it might be in the 9th Amendment's, reservation of rights to the people, but wherever it is, we think it's fairly encompassed in there. And then Casey comes along, does not embrace the reasoning of Roe. All Casey did was hold on to a piece of the holding from Roe, that there was some sort of fundamental right, didn't say where it came from, and then change the actual standard to something different. And so no one is defending the constitutionality of it, and that makes it pretty much an admitted error. And if it's an admitted mistake, as Joseph was saying, correct it as soon as possible, right? Because otherwise we're operating under law that violates and offends the Constitution, and it violates and offends America's foundational principles to respect life. So the fact that it's not in the wording of the Constitution, is not in the understanding or the meaning or the tradition of what people understood at the time of the Constitution's enactment and the amendments ratifications is very telling. Abortion was criminalized in almost all states at that time. So obviously they didn't, in adopting, the Bill of Rights, they didn't think that through the 9th Amendment or later in the 14th Amendment that they were just negating all of these state laws. So it sounds like
Roe and Casey, the unconstitutionality of Roe and Casey was on full display in the left's inability to defend or even have a viable answer for it. I didn't mean that in a pun. I mean, like literally.
Absolutely.
When they can't even have a conversation about it, it goes to show this is supposed to be foundational. You guys are always talking about it's unconstitutional to ban this and to ban that. Well, you don't even have an answer for that, though. You don't even have a defense, a possible defense for, anyways.
Yeah. John, I actually think that's really significant for the broader debate over abortion, because rarely do we talk to each other anymore, unfortunately. And the Supreme Court is a venue where the smartest people on both sides get together and make their best arguments. And what we saw, I think, yesterday is the abortion industry does not have good arguments. They just don't. They weren't really trying to defend the structure of it. They certainly tried to defend abortion as a thing, but I didn't see them making a vigorous defense of the intellectual and constitutional strength of their position. They were just trying to say, we can't undo this because this is the way it's been done, which is odd because the left doesn't defend tradition in any other context except for this one.
So you're talking about precedent, but let's talk about precedent. How strong is precedent? Can it be overturned? When should it be overturned? That's for anyone.
Yeah, well, so there are principles of when stare decisis applies and when it doesn't. And if something was egregiously wrong in the first place, there's essentially no defense because there's no basis. And that's the problem with Roe versus Wade, is it was made up out of whole cloth, and so there was never a legal basis in the first place. In addition, some of the other factors that are looked to are changes in circumstances. And as TESSA alluded to earlier, the changes in circumstances through science, medical technology, just society, availability of contraception, women's success in college and graduate school and in the workplace, the ability to work remotely. There's so many things now that enable women to be successful in the workplace and be moms and have a happy, fulfilling life. There were no pregnancy center networks at the time of Roe v. Wade. I think there might have been a couple in the whole nation. Now we have nearly 3,000 around the country who are eager to equip women. So the actual factual circumstances that have changed, in addition to what we know about fetal development, should be a factor if it's even needed. And then the third thing is, how settled is it? And as Tessa said right out the gate, it's not settled. We have this debate over and over again every time there's a seat empty on the Supreme Court, every time there's a presidential election. Everyone says, is Roe going to be overturned or not? We know it's not settled. It's never been settled. Casey moved the ball, and every lower court that tries to decide it is still trying to make sense of Roe and Casey. So for all those reasons, Roe and Casey don't have any of the marks of stare decisis when you would actually rely on the precedent.
It's very interesting. But unless it's a super precedent, right? Can't believe that argument.
Does it
really-
have a cape? That's the other factor.
Very fun. Very fun.
And John, to her
yeah,
point, I think she's what we're asking the Supreme Court to do is basically ask the oligarchy to surrender some of their power, because it's defined virtually every presidential election. It's the reason Donald Trump was ever president. It's because of the significance of Supreme Court appointments. And I think that speaks to the fact that they seized power that did not belong to themselves, that belonged to the legislative branch. Mm-hmm. And this entire case is a request to give that power back to the legislative branches where the Constitution placed it.
See, I think that's one of the unspoken of results, is that not only would it overturn Roe and be a huge win for pro-life people, but it would also be a big win for liberty. It'd be a big win for saying we're going to take power from federal authorities who it doesn't belong with, and we're going to hand it back to the state. I think that would be secondary to abortion, but still a very, very good application. Okay, we talked about precedent. We've talked about any other thoughts on precedent or the oral arguments before we move on? Okay, we could talk. You said we could talk for months about it. And folks, I really do encourage you. We have a piece coming out today. We're probably going to have 2 or 3 more coming out just about the oral arguments alone. Whether you're a big pro-life activist or not, the oral arguments are pretty fascinating. Just to hear all the sides, it's an apologetic exercise, really, just to kind of see what the other side is saying. Although from what I understand in my analysis of this case, even from a pro-choice perspective, their position wasn't really represented well in these arguments. But still, if you have 2 hours of free time, read it. Or if you have time to sit down and read 157 pages, the transcript is there on the website as well. So let's talk about the church. Actually, you know what? No, I want to go back and talk about Roberts a little bit more. So Chief Justice Roberts, as we said, has been a wild card. More rights on the abortion issue, but his arguments yesterday did certainly seem to indicate that we would at least get an upholding of the Mississippi ban, not necessarily an overturn to Roe. What do you guys think?
I think the possible middle ground, which we think Chief Justice Roberts would be interested in from his reputation as an institutionalist, which is do things moderately, do things incrementally, don't turn the whole nation upside down, would be to throw out the viability line, which he did signal, but keep some sort of undue burden test. And the Mississippi Solicitor General did say you could do a clarified undue burden standard to give states a little more ability to protect those important interests in protecting fetal life, maternal health, and the integrity of the medical profession, which the Supreme Court has recognized are important interests. And that would be, however, very difficult to write, because you would still be drawing a line and creating another new standard that would only invite further litigation and that would still have no basis in the Constitution. And so I think it would be a real problem to write. And the other thing I would note is that the Supreme Court did not need to take this case. As you said, it was actually just the lower courts were following precedent. There's no circuit split. There's no confusion about whether a 15-week limit is under current precedent unconstitutional. The Supreme Court basically reached out and took this at a time when it didn't need to get involved in the debate. So that to me means they really do want to do something, and that maybe the chief isn't afraid to right this wrong.
Will we ever know who the 4 justices were who decided to take this case up?
Well, I tell you what, 4 wouldn't vote to take it unless they knew they had at least 5, real surely.
Okay, retweet that, tweet that.
Yeah, the rule of 4 is really the rule of 5, because you don't take a case if you don't know that your side's going to win, or you don't think.
Right. The undue burden test that the courts are just kind of shackled with right now requires them to say, okay, there's a 24-hour waiting period. Is that an undue burden? What about a 2-hour waiting period? What about a 48-hour waiting period? And that's something that legislatures should be doing. If they're going to create it, we think 48 hours is reasonable. We think 2 hours is reasonable. The idea that the court has kind of has left this undefined has created a problem. But to Denise's point, if you're going to try to fix that, how are they going to fix it? They're going to come in and say, okay, an undue burden, we're going to provide clarity. So an undue burden is a 24-hour waiting period, anything more than a 24-hour waiting period, or, anything post 8 weeks of abortion, because as soon as 8 weeks is decided by the Supreme Court, somebody's going to pass a law at 6 weeks. And so 2 years later, we're going to be back at the Supreme Court, and they're going to say, why is 8 weeks unconstitutional or constitutional and 6 weeks isn't? And so anything short of just a short repeal, a clear repeal and giving it back to the states is just going to be more litigation, and it's going to be back at the court asking them to reevaluate their undue burden test, which is just explicitly legislative action that legislators should be doing rather than the bench.
We don't want the legislators to be judicial. We don't want the judicial to be legislators. It's almost as if they divided up into three, sections on purpose. I don't know. Maybe purpose there. So, okay, you mentioned predictions, and it was also on my outline here. I'm going to go first just because I don't want people to think that I'm making my assessment based off of the experts. So I wrote a piece last week, just before the arguments, 2 weeks ago now. Basically just explaining Roe. It was like 3 times longer than I like any of my articles to be. All of my writers told me I was a hypocrite, but it's okay. The last part of it was talking about the justices given their records, not just voting records at the Supreme Court, but even when they were on lower courts, Gorsuch at the 10th, and things that they've said outside. My prediction is that Sotomayor, Kagan, Breyer obviously are going to strike down as much as they can. Actually, I shouldn't say obviously, but my prediction is that those 3 will vote to strike down the Mississippi ban. I think that Roberts and, this is all pre-oral arguments, by the way, Roberts and Kavanaugh are the wild cards as far as upholding it versus overturning Roe. I think they'll uphold it, but I'm not clear of whether they'll overturn Roe. And I think Alito, Gorsuch, and Barrett will be an overturn.
And no point in even mentioning Justice Thomas because it's so obvious, right?
Oh, sorry. So no, and that's funny.
It's true though.
Well, no, Thomas. I mean, no, I do. So I should have mentioned Thomas. I mean, he's the only one currently on the court who has an absolute record. The only one who's currently on the court who was there for Casey. And it was like, and he said something. I think you alluded to it earlier. Is like, our Roe and Casey precedents are in full cloth, not a shred of constitutional evidence behind them. Man, I like Thomas. He's a good guy. So yes, Thomas as well. That's my. You disagree?
No. You want to take it first? First
Yeah,
Go ahead,
prediction.
Tessa. Yeah.
Oh, well, as a non-lawyer, I can't make any predictions, but I just want to echo what everyone else has said, that I think the arguments made were really strong. I think the momentum is on the pro-life side, and so I think that the court has the opportunity to do a lot of good. And I think the arguments were really compelling, so I really hope that they take this opportunity to move it back to the states, to put the decision back where it belongs, and to just release us from this really unworkable standard that we've been dealing with for almost 50 years now. Yeah. So, optimistic.
Okay. Drawing straws here?
Sure. I think we've got Alito, Thomas, Barrett, Kavanaugh, and Gorsuch are going to overthrow Roe. The 3 lefties are going to write a scathing dissent, and Roberts is going to split the baby somehow in his, partial dissent, partial concurrence.
Okay.
5-3-1.
No pulling punches. All right.
Yeah, I think leaving the law struck down is completely off the table. I think it's going to be a victory of some sort either way. I would say I'm probably 50-50 right now on whether it's a clean overturning of Roe. I believe the votes are there. However, I think that the chief is going to want to be in the majority. I do think that we've seen Kavanaugh and Barrett side with the chief and do more moderate things on religious liberty and these sorts of like close to the heart issues. They're newer justices, and so I could see during the opinion writing process when so much truly is in flux. This is just the beginning. This is when all the negotiating starts. I could see us ending up with a controlling opinion that is still a win for Mississippi, still upholding a 15-week law, but not a complete overturning of Roe.
Okay.
Either one of those.
All right. That's some good answers. Some fun dialogue. Let's move on to the church. We only have a few minutes left, but I do want to talk about this. In the church, abortion is one of those issues that I would hope that all Christians are on the same page about, as far as the life being at conception, it being a sin to believe in, to take a pro-choice position. There is just no biblical consistency. There's no way to use the Bible to justify abortion on an extreme measure or even on a moderate measure. So Joseph, I'll go to you first. What is the church's role in combating abortion?
Well, the church's role, we are to be the hands and feet of Jesus. We're ambassadors for Christ. Whenever we run to fires, we run to problems, because we're supposed to be the ones that have the answers to the questions, because we do, and be the practical, look after orphans and widows in their need kind of ministry. So the church's role is not only to speak the truth about human dignity, but to practically assist people who find themselves in these desperate situations that often lead to abortion. And I think we have to do so with a lot of compassion. Most women who have abortion are not super happy about it. There's a lot of despair, there's hopelessness. And the church should be the antidote to hopelessness. We should be bringing hope where there is despair. And the more effectively we do that, the less need there will be for abortion. There's underlying this, the entire sexual revolution, which encourages people to do whatever feels good, is feeding this problem. The irresponsibility of men who just get people pregnant and walk away and abandon women. There's so many layers of irresponsibility in that for men. So Christian men need to be men. And we need to show an example for the rest of the culture for how to do that. So there's so many components to this debate, right? Where we're living rightly, doing what God created us to be, living as He intended us to, begins to solve this problem. It ruins the demand for abortion, which is really where you want to address this problem. It's more on the demand side than the supply side. But we need to be everywhere, just speaking truth into lies, speaking hope into despair. And then also, but we have to be the ones to say, I will take your kid. If you feel your only option is, I'm going to provide you a real tangible option. And we have to be willing to be uncomfortable. And it's, for better or worse. I mean,
that's why I'm happy. That's why I'm happy that we also have a lot of Christians in the adoption policy area, because right now the red tape is so long. I mean, the church needs to be more involved in adoption, but at the same time, there's so many church families who want to adopt, but they're just on the waiting list for so long. It's like, we need to change this, cut the red tape, cut the bureaucracy, and make it more doable. And you said a very convicting thing. We got to be uncomfortable. We got to make decisions that we otherwise would be like, oh, the Lord put it on someone else's heart. They'll do it. And so, that may be true in many cases, but sometimes we have to say, I'm going to do it anyways out of obedience. Politics is one of the most tangible ways by which the church can be ministering to culture, by change, by justice, creating peace. A lot of these are politically based, founded in political measures. So, the apathy that I see sometimes of the church in politics is very discouraging. But and that's coming from a guy who works in this field. Everywhere I go, all my friends are doing this, but we're working hard, and it's really encouraging to see all my colleagues and what they're doing. So on that same note, the church having a role in the dialogue, we do see pastors and even other staffers at churches wanting to stay away from controversy. And it just drives me nuts, because I don't want to talk about that. That's controversial. Have you read the Old Testament? Have you read the New Testament? There's so much. The gospel is controversial. Everything is controversial. Everything is going to cause division. And you're talking about something that should be so cookie cutter clear that is wrong, but it's still happening all around America. We shouldn't talk about it because it's controversial? My goodness. So I'll start with you, Joe, but anyone, what's your challenge for pastors or Christians who would take that perspective?
Well, I think the church has to reject the world's framing of issues. It's a political issue, it's a not political issue. It's a conservative issue, it's a liberal issue, whatever that is. Biblically, it's either biblical or it's not. Does God care or does God not care? I don't think God particularly cares what color tie I wear today. I'm not wearing a tie. But He doesn't care about those things, so I don't have to have a strong opinion about that. But when God cares, as slaves to Christ, we have to care. And those are one of those issues. I think the church has to see these things. Don't see this as political or not political, because it's like, oh, we want to stay away from the political stuff because that's divisive. Well, that's not the framework that the gospel offers us. When God says this is good, we love it as good. When God said this is wrong, we hate it as evil. And that, to me, is how we should approach all of these issues, some of which will be also debated in the political process, and some of them which will also not be debated in the political process. But to the extent God cares, we should care. I think that's how pastors need to disciple their congregations. That's how parents need to talk to their kids about it. Because I think the framework of political or controversial or not political and not controversial is not helpful, because it distracts us from the real question of whether the Bible speaks to this. And when it does, we are obligated to be where Jesus is on that issue.
And just a quick practical point, I obviously live in the courtroom, but I'm so mindful that the court of public opinion has been so powerful in even what happens in the courts with Roe and the pro-life movement. And so it is critical that pastors in the body of Christ are speaking about what we are for, with courage, with grace, with love, because truth is on our side, like you said. But if we are silent, then all they're going to hear is the other side. And there's going to be fear that sets in where there's confusion among the church because we're not speaking about the truth and we're not speaking to our neighbors in a winsome way. And so I would just really encourage folks to speak up when the Holy Spirit convicts you, to just say something loving. You know, life is a human right. Whatever it might be, to push back when you hear the lies from the other side.
Mm-hmm. And just echoing what everyone else has said, we know that there are people in our churches who have been hurt by abortion, and so we owe it to them to be willing to speak up and to minister to them and to address this issue and not just leave it silent.
Yep. So let's talk about your organization, Charlotte Lozier, SBA List, and her plan. All right, what are some of the ways that SBA List and your other communities there are helping women proactively?
Yes, so I think, and Denise alluded to this earlier, really the way that the pro-life movement has been helping women for the past half century or more. We have over 50 years of pregnancy centers that have been working to support women who are experiencing unplanned pregnancies, working to support women with young children. And our sister organization, the Pregnancy and Life Assistance Network, her plan is just trying to do that at an even higher level. Across the country, there are all of these great pro-life assistance providers that are out there on the ground working to support women and families, but they need to know about each other, and churches need to know about them so that they can support them. And so what her plan has been doing is just going in state by state, looking to see what's there, looking to see where the gaps are, and just working to make sure that everyone is aware of what everyone else is doing so that we can have this unified effort, this cohesive structure that's in place to support women and families. Because so often there are these great organizations already doing great things. It's just making sure that they can link one to the other and so that there are no gaps along the way or any cracks that someone could slip through. Yeah.
It's incredibly discouraging to see so many people saying, oh, you pro-life people are just pro-birth. You don't actually care about the mother of the child. It's like, just Google all the pro-life organizations out there and all the initiatives that they're doing to prevent this. It's so proactive. Monetary needs, diapers, supplies, counseling, it's all available. And I think maybe part of it's a marketing issue on our end, but a lot of it's just like an unwillingness, because ultimately they just don't want abortion to be illegal. And so if they have to confess that they were wrong about that, well, that's just one chip against them, and they won't even consider it. So, but we still do it, and we still help women, and we have a lot of women at pro-life rallies who come out and say, I did have an abortion, and they talk about how grievous it was for them, and so they try to take a proactive measure to prevent it. But then we also have a lot of women who say, I was going to have an abortion, but I was helped through one organization or church. And when I say church, by the way, folks, I'm talking the arm of the church, the church at whole, groups like Family Research Council, ADF, Charlotte Lozier, who are, I don't want to get anyone in trouble. There's a lot of Christians who work there, we'll just say that. Whether they're faith-based or just have a lot of Christian influence there. They're doing great work. Let's talk about a Post-Roe America. We'll just take a couple minutes here. We actually have talked about a lot of this already, but we'll just say, what does it look like, Denise, when we say it's going to go back to the states? When the power goes back to the states, what does that mean? And what are some of the implications there?
Yeah, so the good news is several states have trigger laws that when Roe is overturned, those states will automatically protect life by completely banning abortion. So those will spring right back. Other states, I think, will be eager to go ahead and enact limits, gestational limits of 15 weeks or perhaps much earlier heartbeat bills. And so that's going to be extremely important for those legislatures to go ahead and get that in place. The sooner they are, the more life that's protected. And then we're going to need to continue the conversation so that we are showing that what's happening in those states is succeeding. We know that abortion harms women, so we need to make sure in our communities that those states that are banning abortion are flourishing and are a shining example. And hopefully the neighboring states will start to realize about the humanity of the unborn and how it is possible to empower women and promote life. So I think it's a combination of immediate legislation to protect life and also communication and messaging.
We're almost out of time. Tess, I'm going to give the last question to you. Now, we are all young adults here, but Tess is the youngest among us, so I'm going to ask you, what is your advice for young Christians today across the country who have a passion for politics but really want to be involved? So what is your advice for young Christians today who want to be involved in politics?
Well, first I would say good for you. It's great to want to be involved. These are some of the most important issues that we could possibly be talking about, and we need everyone to get on board and to join in. And so I would just encourage young adults who want to get more involved to start by educating themselves. Learn what's going on, learn what they believe, learn why they believe it. Center for Biblical Worldview could be a good place to start. But really just to equip themselves and then to start looking for opportunities. It might be at the local level, it might be even through volunteering. All of these pregnancy centers that we've mentioned aren't political themselves, but if you want to get involved in the pro-life movement, just volunteering at your local pregnancy center could be a great way to start. There are so many opportunities and so many different venues for all sorts of different personalities and skill sets. So. Right. Love to have you.
Well, thanks so much again, y'all, for your time. Folks, we're going to have all of their Facebooks and their social media accounts either tagged or listed in the comments below. We'll also have some articles coming out explaining more about what they do. Please check them out. Consider donating and all that jazz. Be involved. If you want to be involved in politics, you heard it from Tessa, you heard it from all of us, there is a need. There is a need for the church to be involved in politics. All the injustices, a lot of the things that we see on the news could be mitigated if there were people involved in politics who actually cared about justice, who actually cared about people the way that the church should. So thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. Again, check out all their websites, all their Facebook groups, and we'll see you next time.